Irene, don't touch the thermostat. It's not that cold, Lauren said, without looking up, her voice, even almost gentle, as if issuing a reminder to a child rather than a mother. Irene froze mid-motion, her fingers inches away from the dial. The air in the living room had grown crisp as late afternoon light surrendered to the grey hues of early winter. She wasn't particularly cold, not physically. It was something else, the dull ache of displacement, of knowing that warmth wasn't hers to request any more. She stepped away quietly and wrapped the old blue shawl tighter around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of lavender, or perhaps of memory. She returned to the armchair near the window, the same spot where Robert's teacup used to rest on a small wooden tray. She had placed it there every morning, even after he passed. Now the tray was gone. The teacup, too, tucked high in a cabinet she could no longer reach. Out of sight, out of place like her. Across the room, 6-year-old Emily sat cross-legged on the floor building towers with pastel-coloured blocks. Every so often the child looked up at Irene with a strange softness, as though sensing something was not quite right. But children couldn't name atmospheres. They only breathed them in silently. "I'll take care of dinner tonight," Irene offered, rising slowly. "No, Mom," Lauren said, her hands full of grocery bags. "Just let me handle it. Last time the dishwasher overflowed." Her words hovered somewhere between concern and condescension. "I only rinsed the dishes," Irene whispered, mostly to herself. Lauren didn't reply. Bradley emerged from the hallway with his usual composed air. "Movie night tonight," he said brightly. "Our tradition." Irene nodded, unsure whether the remark was meant to include her. The remote control rested on the arm of the couch, but when she reached for it, Bradley casually picked it up and switched to the channel he preferred. "It's almost time," he said. She returned to her chair, letting silence fill the room, like water rising in a tank. The walls were spotless, white, smooth, the kind that absorbed no history, told no stories. Not like the old house, hers and Robert's, where time had left traces in every floorboard creak. Later, after dinner, prepared and cleaned up without her, she retreated to the guest room. They called it that, though she had been there for 2 years. The door creaked faintly when she shut it. She sat at the desk and opened the small locked box she had brought from the old house. Inside were envelopes carefully labelled. She pulled out one marked "Last Quarter," personal, and unfolded the bank statement. But the name at the top was not hers. Lauren Mitchell. Her daughter's name. Her own funds accounts she thought were hers redirected. Consolidated, reassigned. She blinked hard and reread the numbers, the decimal points, the signatures. A familiar hollowness settled in her chest, different from grief. More precise. Colder. Everything here belonged to someone else. The house. The accounts. Even the teacup. She hadn't signed anything, or had she? At the hospital, there were forms, pressure moments, blurred by medication. She couldn't recall. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered back to the living room. The city lights pressed faint shadows against the windows. The white walls seemed to pulse with stillness. She sat down, her shawl draped over her lap, like armor made of threadbare memory. Emily's small footsteps padded in. The girl climbed up beside her, eyes wide with childlike secrecy. "Grandma," she whispered, barely louder than breath. "Mom and Dad said they're going to take all your money tonight." Irene didn't react, didn't gasp or cry. She just stared out the window, as if Robert might appear out there beyond the streetlights. Her hand rested on the windowsill, empty where the teacup used to be. "They said it like a game," Emily added, but Mommy was angry. She said, "You're too stubborn." The words didn't hit like a slap. They sank quietly, heavily into the small room where yellow light from the night lamp trembled against the rain-soaked window pane. Irene sat on the edge of the bed, her shawl still around her shoulders, though the room wasn't cold. Emily curled beside her, cradling a small stuffed rabbit whose ears were worn from affection. Outside, the rain whispered across the roof in even strokes. Inside, everything was still too still, Irene thought. Not peaceful, but paused, like something was holding its breath. Emily fidgeted. They said you didn't need the money anymore, and that they'd help you sign the papers. Irene looked at the girl carefully. What papers, sweetie, I don't know. Grown-up ones. But they laughed. Then Mommy said, you don't remember things anyway. Emily twirled one ear of the rabbit. But you do, don't you, Grandma? The girl's trust lit something faint in Irene. She reached toward the small metal box tucked beneath the nightstand. Inside, nestled between old photographs and yellowed letters, was a key. She hesitated, then pressed a small button behind the headboard. A quiet click answered. The wall panel slid open an inch. From behind it, Irene pulled out a box no larger than a loaf of bread. The small safe Robert had once used for his passport, tucked away during his last year. She opened it with the key, slowly, carefully. Inside were papers, a faded deed to the old house, a tax return from 10 years ago, and a note from Robert, folded neatly. But none of the recent financial records she expected. No sign of the account summaries, no beneficiary list. Nothing about the trust fund they had spoken of after her second surgery. Irene stared at the empty space within the box, as though staring into herself. The hallway floor creaked. Light footsteps approached, followed by a light knock. Irene Bradley's voice, warm, calm, just above a whisper. You two are still up. Before she could tuck the box away, the door opened a few inches. Bradley peeked in, smile soft. Did Emily wake you? No, Irene said, her voice even. We were just talking. About what? He stepped in, hands in his robe, pockets, his manner almost too relaxed. Dreams, Emily chirped. Grandma was telling me stories. Bradley chuckled. Good. That's what grandmas are for. He looked at Irene and added, Tomorrow, if you'd like, I can take you to the bank. Help get things straightened out. I know the accounts can be confusing. She held his gaze for a moment. Yes, that might be helpful. He nodded, then bent to kiss Emily's forehead. Sleep tight, little one. When he left, the door closed with a soft but deliberate click. Emily didn't speak right away. She shifted closer, her small voice muffled in the crook of Irene's arm. Dad didn't like it when I told Grandma. He locked my door last night. Irene froze. What I wanted to get water. But the door didn't open. A beat of silence passed. The rain outside had slowed, but something colder passed through Irene's spine than any winter draft. She leaned down, kissed Emily's hair gently and pulled her close. Don't tell Mom and Dad anything, okay? She whispered. But always remember where I put the key. Irene dug behind the bookshelf and found the old brass key Robert once gave her, the one no one else knew existed. Her fingers trembled as they closed around it. The metal was cool, aged, the edges smooth from time and touch. She hadn't seen it in years, yet her hand had moved to that hollow behind the books, almost without thinking, as if memory itself had reached out. It was morning. The house stood still, emptied of voices. Lauren and Bradley had taken Emily to school, a rare silence stretching across the floors. Irene listened for a moment, unsure if she trusted the quiet. Then she tucked the key inside her sleeve and walked slowly toward the garage. The garage was colder than she remembered. Dust coated the edges of shelves where unused boxes leaned at odd angles. A single bulb hung above, swaying slightly, casting long shadows. Her breath was visible in the air. She stood before the old filing cabinet Robert had insisted on keeping. Its bottom drawer was stiff, and she had to kneel, steadying herself with one hand on the concrete floor. The key fit perfectly. A soft click, and the drawer gave way. Inside were folders, old, thick, layered with paper that had yellowed. She pulled them out one by one: insurance forms, repair bills, photographs of the house when it was first built. At the very back, a folder marked in Robert's handwriting, "Shared Assets." Her heart tightened. She opened it, carefully revealing documents with both their names. The original deed to their home, her home with Robert and Irene Halstead, printed in careful block letters, account summaries with balances they had once reviewed together. A will unsigned, dated just weeks before his last hospital stay. She unfolded a sheet, tucked behind the others. A letter. The ink had faded, but Robert's handwriting was unmistakable. "Irene, if I'm gone, keep this. Don't let anyone else decide for you. I trust your judgment more than they do. You'll know when the time is right." Her vision blurred. She stood in the dimness, surrounded by the smell of old paper and engine oil, and felt Robert's presence in the quiet, as though he were still there, guiding her hand, telling her she was not forgotten. Wiping her eyes, she placed the documents back carefully, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were blank sheets, decoys. She switched them with the originals, then took out her phone and quietly snapped photos of each page. She knew this wasn't the end, merely the beginning. She folded the printed copies neatly and slipped them into the inside pocket of her old gardening shirt, the one Lauren never touched. It still hung behind her bedroom door, smelling faintly of rosemary and soil. On her way back through the hallway, she paused by a photo of Emily in a yellow raincoat, arms wide, as if catching the wind. Irene smiled faintly, her thoughts flickering between the child's whisper and Robert's letter. Then, as she reached the kitchen, a sudden sound broke the quiet. The doorbell rang short, insistent. She froze. Bradley was back, earlier than expected. "Mom, just sign this and rest. We've scheduled someone to help you with decisions." Irene sat at the far end of the dining table, her fingers loosely wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. The morning light filtered in through the sheer curtains, casting pale stripes across the tabletop. Everything was arranged neatly, too neatly, as if the entire setting had been staged. Bradley stood beside her chair, his tone gentle, his smile polite. Behind him, Lauren moved briskly between the kitchen counter and the coffee pot, humming a tuneless melody, avoiding eye contact. The stranger, Cynthia, sat across from Irene, poised with a black folder resting atop her tablet. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her tone warm but practiced. "Mrs. Halstead, I'm just here to walk you through a few supportive steps. Nothing complicated. It's standard, especially for families looking to ensure peace of mind." Cynthia opened the folder with the precision of someone who had done this dozens of times. A pen was already uncapped, placed neatly beside the first document. Lauren poured coffee into 2 cups and brought them over. "It's just so you don't have to worry about any of this, Mom. Brad and I can take care of things. You can focus on your health and Emily." Bradley nodded, sliding the papers an inch closer to Irene. "You've done so much for us. Let us take care of you now." Irene didn't respond. She traced the rim of her cup slowly, then looked up at Cynthia. "Would you mind if I read it myself first? My eyes aren't what they used to be." "Of course," Cynthia said sweetly, "though I do have an appointment at the bank soon. If you're comfortable, you can just sign the first page, the rest is standard." She smiled, revealing the same type of gleam one finds on porcelain, beautiful but cold. "We'll leave the packet with you to review later." Lauren touched Irene's shoulder. "It's just a formality, Mom." Irene nodded slightly, her eyes dull, Her shoulders slumped. The room quieted. The papers were left on the table, and Cynthia packed her bag with a brisk motion. "You're in good hands," she said before standing to leave. The three of them exited the room together, their voices trailing off into polite murmurs. As their footsteps faded, Irene remained still listening. She counted the beats of silence, then rose. She fetched her magnifying glass from the side drawer, the one she used for crossword puzzles, and leaned over the document. Her lips moved silently as she traced each line, each clause. On page 4, near the bottom, she stopped. Her breath caught. It was there, a paragraph permitting the sale of any jointly or solely owned assets without prior notice or consent from the original holder once the document was signed. Power of attorney disguised as assistance. She stood quietly for a moment, the sound of the refrigerator hum filling the space. Then she opened the drawer again and pulled out a blank document, an old printer misfeed she had saved just in case. With steady hands, she photographed each page, turning them slowly, placing them back exactly as they were, except the original. That she folded carefully and slid into the thin compartment beneath the seat cushion on the old rocking chair in her bedroom. She placed the blank copy where the original had been, tucked the pen back beside it, and exhaled deeply. They wouldn't know, not yet. She takes a photo of each page, puts the original somewhere else, and replaces it with a blank copy. "Mrs. Grayson," a soft female voice said, as Irene was photocopying documents in the community library. She turned, startled, holding the warm paper halfway out of the printer tray. Her reading glasses slid slightly down the bridge of her nose. A younger woman stood a few feet away, round face-brown cardigan eyes that looked both gentle and curious. "I'm sorry," the woman continued. "I didn't mean to interrupt. You looked like you might need help with the machine." Irene blinked, then smiled faintly. "It's all right. These things take patience." The community library smelled of paper and time, a soft scent, not unpleasant. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, lighting the small printing area at the end of the hallway. It was one of the few places Irene had found where no one hovered, no voices instructed her what to do, and no quiet manipulations lurked behind smiles. Just shelves, silence, and machines. "I'm Rachel," the woman said, holding out a hand. "I work here part-time. Just doing some shelf checks, and saw you from the corner." Irene nodded, still holding her papers close. "Thank you. I'm almost done." Rachel didn't pry, just smiled and turned slightly to adjust a paper tray. Then after a pause, "I know it's none of my business, but those looked like legal documents. I only ask because, well, my mother went through something similar. After my father died." Irene's eyes flicked up. Her hand paused on the machine's panel. Rachel softened her voice. She was told she had to sign some things, that it was for her good. We didn't find out until much later that they'd taken her name off the deed. Irene didn't speak. Her hands slowly collected the last set of copies, stacking them in a folder she'd brought inside her handbag. Rachel reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small card. "Janet Holcomb," she said, offering it carefully. "She's a lawyer who helped us. Specializes in elder law and trust matters." Irene hesitated. It's just some paperwork. I'm sure it's nothing." Rachel smiled gently. "That's what my mum thought too. But it's better to know." Irene took the card eyes, scanning the gold print. The name was calm, solid. Janet Holcomb, Trust and Elder Law. Confidential consultations. As Rachel turned to go, she paused, then came back and leaned in slightly. With a pen from her pocket, she scribbled something on the back of the card. "Go alone," she whispered. "Don't tell them." Then she walked away, blending into the quiet again. Irene stood there still. In her wallet, folded neatly between two bills, was an old photo of Emily wearing sunglasses too big for her face, laughing on the beach. Irene took it out, slowly smiled at the memory, then tucked the card behind it. Later that night, when she returned home, she opened a drawer and pulled out the old letter from Robert, the one he wrote near the end, the one he had sealed but never sent. She unfolded it gently, read his words again, then slid Rachel's card inside and resealed it with a soft press of her fingers. Irene tucks the card inside an old letter from Robert. The instructions are hidden inside. "Why do you need the car, Mom? You have nowhere to go." Lauren's voice drifted through the hallway like steam from a boiling kettle, soft, but too warm, too direct. Irene didn't look up. She stood at the kitchen counter, fingers brushing lightly across her purse, pretending to search for gum. "I just thought I'd take a drive," she said, eyes low, voice even. Where, Lauren asked, drying her hands with exaggerated slowness. "Nowhere in particular." The conversation ended there, but the unease clung to Irene's shoulders like the mist outside. That morning, fog hugged the streets. Every lamppost, every parked car wore a grey film. Irene walked 2 blocks before calling a cab, choosing a direction away from the usual grocery store. She clutched her handbag tight her coat, buttoned to the top. Her fingers brushed the card Rachel had given her, still hidden behind the photo of Emily. By the time she reached the law office, she was 10 minutes late. The building was old, brick-faced, with peeling white trim and an iron railing lining the front steps. Around back, the parking lot held only 3 cars, one of them a navy blue sedan, probably Janet's. She paused to breathe, adjusted her scarf, then walked up the side entrance. Inside the waiting room smelled faintly of old furniture and lemon polish. A standing lamp hummed beside a corduroy chair. There were no assistants, no sleek surfaces, only quiet. The door opened. A woman stepped out, hair silver and straight-dressed plainly in grey wool and low shoes. Her eyes were sharp, but kind. Mrs. Grayson Irene nodded. "I'm Janet Holcomb," she said. "Come in." "Would you like tea?" Irene shook her head, her mouth dry. Inside the small office, sunlight barely reached the desk. Files were stacked in neat piles. On the wall hung a photo of a young Rachel smiling beside a woman Irene now realized was her mother. Janet motioned to the seat. "Rachel told me a little. Let's start with what you brought." Irene opened her bag hands, slightly unsteady. She laid down copies, the deed, the financial forms, and the unsigned documents Cynthia had left. Janet examined each with deliberate care, her face unreadable. "They're trying to establish legal authority," Janet said finally. "This power of attorney form is especially dangerous. If you sign it, they could liquidate assets, your home accounts, without informing you." Irene nodded. Janet continued, "You're still legally competent. What we need is a countermeasure, a refusal of authority. I'll help you file it." Irene looked away for a moment, then back at Janet. Her throat tightened. The words came from somewhere deep and forgotten. "They think I won't notice. That I'm slow now." I almost believed them. Janet set her pen down gently and said, "You did the right thing by coming. You're not alone." That was when the tears came, not of sadness, but of recognition. They fell quietly, sliding down cheeks that had endured too long in silence. Janet handed her a crisp form. "This is a refusal of authority and independent competency assessment. It tells the court you retain your rights and pauses any transfer of control." Irene stared at the paper. She ran her thumb across the heading, then placed it carefully into her folder. Outside, the air had not cleared. Fog still hung low across the street. As she stepped off the curb, Irene paused. There, half hidden behind a hedge, was a silver SUV, same make and model as Bradley's. She did not stop walking. Irene leaves the office, but sees a car similar to Bradley's parked across the street. "Why do you keep these old things? They're not worth anything." Lauren had said it a few days ago, standing near the bookshelf, pointing absently at the locked drawer. Her tone had been light, almost amused. But Irene hadn't missed the way Lauren's eyes lingered a moment too long on the keyhole. That afternoon the house was quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, blurring the outside world into soft greys and shadows. Emily was at her piano lesson, Bradley still at work, and Lauren, as far as Irene could tell, had gone out. Irene closed the bedroom door and drew the curtain halfway. The air in the room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. The top drawer of the dresser creaked as she opened it, revealing the brass key she had kept hidden beneath folded scarves. She moved to the bottom cabinet, the one with the narrow wooden drawer Robert used to call our lockbox. The key slid in with a familiar resistance, as if the drawer had held its breath for years. Click. Inside, a faded green tin box waited. The paint was chipped, but the latch still held. Irene opened it slowly. The hinges gave a soft groan. Photographs curled at the edges, a pressed handkerchief. And beneath them, two things that made her fingers pause: a thick envelope and a small handheld tape recorder, its battery cover taped with yellowing adhesive. She unfolded the envelope first. A will dated 2016. Robert's handwriting on the margin read, "To be updated. Talk to Irene." Her eyes scanned the lines. His intentions had been clear. The house, the accounts, even the land in Maine, all held in joint ownership, all to pass to her if he died first. Tucking the will into her lap, she picked up the recorder and pressed play. A soft static. Then Robert's voice. "If you're hearing this, I suppose I didn't get around to revising things. I didn't want the children to be hasty. Money has a way of making people forget who they were. Irene, you always had more sense than I did." Irene closed her eyes. His voice filled the room, steady and familiar. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a warning, a message preserved in time. She rewound the tape, then jotted his words onto a folded notepad, careful to get them exactly as he said them. When she went to place the tin box back, something made her pause. The corner of the lid didn't close the same way. Her eyes narrowed. The latch was bent slightly inward, as though someone had pried it open recently. She checked the scarf that had been tucked beside it. The fold was off. Someone had searched it. Slowly, Irene placed the box back and relocked the drawer. Her hands moved with care, but her mind raced. The security of memory had been breached. She remained sitting there, hands still resting on the closed drawer. The rain softened against the glass. Then came the sound. Light footsteps in the hallway, slow measured. Not Emily's. She sits quietly, her hand still on the box, when she hears light footsteps in the hallway. Not Emily's. "I made you some tea. You like mint. Right?" Lauren's voice trailed behind the soft clink of porcelain. She set the cup down on the side table, its steam curling upward like a question with no clear answer. Irene blinked, then slowly turned her head. "Oh, mint," she said mildly, her voice lined with weariness. "How kind." The living room felt dim despite the daylight. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass, like it had nowhere else to go. The television was on some muted nature documentary flickering across the screen. No one watched. Irene reached for the teacup fingers, steady, but her mind sharper than she let on. Lauren sat across from her legs, crossed phone, resting loosely in her palm. "I was just thinking," she began, lightly stirring her own drink, though she hadn't added anything to it. "Do you remember what we signed the other day?" "With Cynthia." Irene paused, tilting her head, eyes drifting toward the flickering screen. What was that, dear? She asked gently. Are you talking about Emily's tuition paperwork? Lauren froze for a half-second, the spoon hitting her cup, once then resting. No, she replied, a note of caution creeping into her tone. I meant the financial documents. You know, the ones for your comfort and security. Irene let out a soft laugh, almost grandmotherly in its tone. Oh yes, of course. Comfort and security, she echoed. That's so thoughtful of you. Lauren gave a tight smile, then tapped her screen. Brad, hey. I think Mum is a bit out of sorts today. She's not recalling the paperwork. She hit the speaker icon. Again, Bradley's voice came through, clipped but concerned. Maybe we should schedule that evaluation sooner. Has she been taking her meds? Irene looked at the cup in her hand and lifted it slowly to her lips. She took a small sip, then set it back down. Does this tea have sugar? She asked softly. Lauren furrowed her brow. No. Mom knows you don't take sugar. Irene turned her gaze toward the window eyes, following the path of a droplet sliding down the glass. Yes, she murmured, but Mom doesn't remember what she signed. The room held its breath. From the speaker, Bradley's voice crackled. Did she just say? Lauren reached over and ended the call. Silence fell again, except for the distant rain and the hum of the refrigerator. Irene picked up the cup again, turning it slightly in her hand, her face unreadable. Across from her, Lauren watched her mother with a look that flickered between worry and calculation. Then she smiled a little too brightly. I think we need to make an appointment with the doctor. Lauren looked at Irene, silent for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. I think we need to make an appointment with the doctor. Grandma, if you don't remember, can I help you write it down? Emily's voice was soft, but the sincerity in her eyes made Irene pause. The little girl sat beside her on the old wooden rocking chair, feet swinging just above the deck, a tiny notebook nestled in her lap. Morning sunlight filtered through the maple leaves, dancing over their shoulders in golden patches. Birds chirped lazily from the fence. For a moment, the world was quiet in a way that felt honest. Irene turned to look at her granddaughter. Write it down, she asked gently. Emily nodded. You said you forgot some things, but I remember you telling me stories, like when I was little. I want to be a writer someday, so I thought maybe if we write it together it won't be lost. The words sat in the air like a thread offered from one heart to another. Inside the house, she could hear Lauren's muffled voice, probably on the phone again, and the familiar sound of Bradley pacing. But out here on the porch, time moved differently. Irene folded the shawl across her lap and gave a faint smile. Well then, if you're going to be a writer, you'll need to know how to listen. Emily clicked open her pen, nodding solemnly. My grandfather Irene, began her voice low, once told me that if I ever reached a moment where people wanted to make choices for me, I should walk away, even if it meant walking alone. Emily's pen scratched across the paper. He said that our voice, our will, is like a compass. It doesn't always make us popular, but it keeps us true. More scribbling. The notebook's pages fluttered slightly in the breeze. Irene looked ahead beyond the backyard trees. Her voice dropped. And when I lost Robert, I thought, maybe my compass had stopped working. But now I know it didn't. I just forgot to check it. Emily glanced up. That's a good line, Grandma. Irene smiled. The girl asked softly, Do you feel better when you tell stories? Sometimes, Irene replied. Sometimes it makes the remembering worse, but it helps me know what matters. Emily sat straighter. Then I'll help you keep it. She turned to a fresh page. Tell me something no one else knows. Irene hesitated, her hand tightening around the edge of the shawl. I kept a copy of something important, just in case. If ever you need to find it, look in my green coat. Inside the left pocket, there's a small flap hidden behind the lining. Emily's eyes widened. Like a secret message, Irene nodded. Something like that? But only if it's really needed. Okay. Okay. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The chair rocked slowly. A breeze passed. Then Irene whispered almost to herself, "If anyone needs to know in the future, show them this notebook." Emily didn't answer. She simply turned to the last page and wrote one final line in smaller letters, careful and deliberate. Emily quietly writes her last line of the day Grandma still remembers, just chooses to be silent. "I remember the last time Robert was here, really." The voice belonged to Mr. Raymond, older now, shoulders a bit more stooped, but the same gentle face framed by silver hair and thoughtful eyes. Irene felt a tightness ease in her chest at the sound of his voice, so different from the others she heard every day. The old local bank hadn't changed much. Wooden counters, frosted windows, and the faint scent of aged paper. The autumn wind followed her in swirling leaves that clung briefly to the entrance mat before disappearing into the pale morning light. She gave a soft smile. "You do?" Raymond nodded. He came in alone that day, said he wanted to keep something aside. "For you, in case things ever changed." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Irene clutched her folder tighter. Inside, she had the old power of attorney Robert had filed years ago, long before the newer ones Lauren and Bradley had drafted. She also had a faded photocopy of Robert's will, the 2016 version, and a printed photo of the two of them from their 35th anniversary. It had been her idea to include it. Raymond motioned to a side office. "Come in. We can talk." Inside, the lighting was warmer, softer. Irene sat down slowly, her eyes moving to the desk, still tidy still, with the same pen set Robert once gave him for Christmas. Raymond saw the direction of her gaze and chuckled. "Still works like a charm." As she opened her folder, a younger woman knocked gently and stepped in. The new manager, sharply dressed, perfectly poised, Mrs. Grayson. She began her smile thin. "We've been informed by your family that any major account actions should be reviewed in light of your current situation." Raymond looked sharply at her, but she continued. "It's standard for senior clients to go through a competency evaluation, just to be sure they understand the transactions." Irene straightened her back a little. "I've been understanding my transactions since before you were born." The woman's smile didn't flicker. "Of course, just protocol." Raymond broke the tension by clearing his throat. "Let me get something from the back." He returned a moment later and slipped a thin envelope into Irene's folder carefully, quietly. "This is a form requesting a private audit of your accounts," he said, voice even. "You don't have to fill it here. Just mail it to the office address. No one else needs to be present." Irene nodded slightly, her fingers brushing the envelope. The manager's eyes narrowed. "Well then, Raymond stood thank you for visiting. Let us know if there's anything else we can assist you with." Outside, the autumn light had shifted the wind, picking up, carrying hints of dried leaves and memory. Irene stepped onto the sidewalk envelope, nestled inside her coat. As she passed the glass front of the bank, she glanced to the left and paused. Irene leaves the bank envelope in hand, looking through the glass to see Bradley parked nearby. The old clock on the mantelpiece stopped last year, but today it turns. A soft click, barely audible. Irene had passed it every morning, always with a gentle hand brushing its wooden side. It had belonged to Robert's mother, then sat in their dining room for decades. It hadn't worked in over a year. But now, in the pale blue of dawn, the second hand moved half an inch and stopped again. She stared. Something wasn't right. The rest of the house slept. Through the window, the first light of morning touched the frosted grass, painting silver along the garden path. Emily's school bag lay by the door, a note from Lauren pinned to it. Irene moved slowly, wrapping her shawl tighter, and stepped closer to the clock. Her fingers felt along its frame, the varnish worn smooth from years of cleaning. Then at the bottom, where no one ever looked, she found a faint groove. A small door. She had never noticed it before. With effort, she eased it open. Inside, nestled between gears and dust, was a tiny black dot, not part of any clock she remembered. A camera. The lens blinked once, then went dark. She reached in and pulled out a small, unfamiliar card, a memory chip. No sound, no warning. Just a quiet betrayal tucked inside something sacred. Back in her room, Irene plugged the card into the side of her old laptop, the one she had tucked away since Robert passed. It whirred to life, slowly groaning like a tired friend. A folder popped open. Reek A 045. She clicked play. Static. Then voices. I don't care what she remembers. Mum will never win, she doesn't know anything. Bradley's voice said clearly. Another voice followed. Lauren. Then hurry up. We just need her to sign the last page. No drama. Silence again. Then the soft sound of a teacup being placed on glass, last week's conversation, recorded without her knowing. Irene didn't flinch. She simply pressed pause, then copied the file. Her hands were steady now. She reopened the clock and placed the memory card exactly where she found it. She clicked the face back into place, adjusted it to the wrong time on purpose, and stepped back. The room looked just as it had, peaceful, antique, deceived. She sat at her desk and opened her inbox. A draft email blinked on the screen. To Julie L., attorney, subject, personal documentation. Urgent. She clicked attach file. The cursor hovered over the button. Then slowly she pressed send. She opens the email attachés. The audio file prepares to send it to an address called Julie L., attorney, Julie Langston. Mom used to call me daughter, but today you call me client. Okay. Irene's voice was soft, but there was something in the way she sat, hands folded gently on the table, back straight, that suggested this was not her first battle. The room around her was small but warm. A yellow floor lamp cast soft light onto dark wooden shelves lined with tidy files. Outside, the rain tapped rhythmically against the frosted glass door, carrying with it the kind of hush only cold days could offer. Julie Langston looked up from the file in her hand, her expression unreadable at first. She was 38 now, but her eyes hadn't changed since she was the girl next door. The girl who used to hide bruises behind her school cardigan. Irene Julie said slowly, I never forgot. I know, Irene replied. Julie placed the file gently on the table, flipping it open to a page marked with a small yellow tab. This, she tapped, is the audio you sent. I've listened. It's clear, direct, and time-stamped. Do you agree to proceed according to the law? Irene nodded, her shawl slipping slightly off her shoulder. Just get the facts down. Slow is fine. Julie's assistant, a quiet young woman in a green sweater, began typing. We'll start by filing a formal petition to freeze any asset transfers, Julie said, under the Elder Protection Statute. That gives us some legal pause time to examine who has access, who made what decisions, and whether any coercion can be established. Irene didn't smile. She simply leaned back a little, as if letting herself breathe again. Julie poured 2 cups of coffee. No sugar, right? You still remember? Julie's eyes warmed. Everything. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Irene glanced at it, not as a threat this time, but as a rhythm. Her own pace. You know, Julie said after a pause, if they react, then we'll know who's hiding it. Irene looked at the window rain, drawing lines like old script. Let's find out. Julie picked up a fresh form. Do you have a copy of what they made you sign, the most recent document Irene didn't answer right away? She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope already opened at the top. Inside was not the document itself, but a folded sheet of drawing paper, the kind Emily used. She laid it flat on the desk. I think Irene said slowly, my granddaughter might have redrawn. Julie asks Irene, do you have a copy of what they made you sign? Irene simply said, my granddaughter might have redrawn. She couldn't read, but she remembered every little cat symbol drawn on the corner of the paper. The crayon made soft, uneven sounds on the page, a waxy whisper that seemed to echo in the yellow-lit living room. Irene sat across from Emily at the small coffee table. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her gaze stayed fixed on the child's face. Outside, the sun was dipping lower, casting long lines through the window blinds like quiet reminders of time passing. Emily hummed softly, then tilted her head. It had this shape, she said, drawing a long rectangle with a dark blue crayon. And Mommy said not to peek, but I did anyway. Irene didn't rush her. She simply nodded. That's okay, sweetheart. What do you remember? Emily tapped her crayon gently on the edge of the paper. Mommy was whispering to Daddy. They were holding a big piece of paper. I saw a circle with a cat inside. It was next to where Mommy wrote her name. A cat? Irene asked, trying not to sound too eager. Yes, Emily nodded. I remember, 'cause Mommy said it was her little sign, like a secret. But then she tore it up after they finished. She said it was just practice. Irene's fingers tightened slightly on the fabric of her dress. Emily, she said, her voice soft. Can you draw it? The whole thing as much as you remember. Emily's eyes lit up with the invitation. She loved drawing. It made her feel important. She leaned over the paper, her little tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. First she drew a square border, then added inside lines that looked like boxes, the kind grown-ups filled in with writing. She drew a little stamp-like circle in the top left corner. Inside it, she carefully scribbled a small cat with pointed ears. There, she said proudly, like this. Irene leaned forward, her heart steady, but thudding. The drawing wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. The logo at the top, it looked just like the emblem from the bank Lauren and Bradley used. The boxes, the placement, even the bold line at the bottom where signatures usually went, it was unmistakably modelled on a power of attorney form. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she stood up slowly and fetched her phone. With careful hands, she took a photo of the drawing, angling it to include Emily's small fingers still holding the crayon. Then she sat back down beside her. You're very good at remembering, Emily. The girl smiled, drawing another cat in the corner. Irene stared at the image on her phone, then opened a message window addressed to Julie Langston. She typed only one sentence, "Can a child testify by memory?" Then she hit send. Irene pours tea for Lauren, using the same cup that Lauren broke, and Irene secretly replaces it with a new one. The kitchen was quiet, almost reverent. The warm ceiling lights glowed above polished countertops. Outside, the rain had eased into a soft mist. Irene stood with her back to the table, carefully placing 2 cups on a wooden tray. The steam curled upward from the jasmine tea, delicate and fragrant. Lauren sat already phone resting screen down beside her fingers, tapping a slow rhythm on the edge of the table. When Irene turned the tray in her hands, didn't tremble. She placed the cup in front of her daughter. Lauren looked at it. A pause. You replaced it? She said quietly, her lips forming the words like a reflex. That's The one I broke, isn't it? I found another? Irene replied, sitting down opposite her. Almost the same. You broke it last winter. I didn't say anything then. Some things don't need scolding. Lauren picked up the cup, slowly weighing its warmth, its memory. You don't forget anything, she murmured. You just choose not to say it. Irene tilted her head, her smile soft and tired. That's what mothers do. They sipped in silence. The jasmine lingered on the air. Lauren's posture shifted, relaxed, but not quite. Irene watched the movements with the eyes of someone who had learned to notice what wasn't said. I hope Irene said, her voice slow, as if testing each word, that all the documents between us are as clear as this tea. Lauren's cup halted mid-air. No sugar, Irene added gently. No aftertaste. The porcelain clicked against the saucer as Lauren set it down. Of course, Mom, she replied, tone light. You've always been careful with papers. Her hand reached for the spoon beside her cup, but it slipped clinking against the table before falling to the floor. Irene didn't flinch, but she noted the tremor in Lauren's fingers the second glance toward the hallway. The pulse of alertness had returned. Some truths didn't need announcing. They surfaced in the silence. A soft vibration came from Lauren's phone. She turned it over, glanced, didn't unlock it. Irene rose from her chair. She moved without urgency, stepped over to the cupboard and bent down. From beneath the chair cushion, she lifted the small grey lockbox, old scratched familiar. She didn't speak immediately. The weight of the box in her hands felt heavier tonight. Tomorrow, she said quietly, not looking at Lauren. I'll check everything again. From the beginning. The pear tree in the backyard has blossomed, for the first time in 4 years. A soft spring breeze moved through the yard, brushing against the faded wooden fence and whispering through the high grass. The sunlight filtered through young leaves, casting dappled patterns on the old patio. The wooden chairs creaked lightly as they settled under Irene's weight. Beside her, a small teapot sat, warming in the sun, steam rising slowly from its spout. Emily sat on the step legs, folded beneath her, scribbling a careful rainbow onto thick white paper. Crayons were scattered beside her like fallen petals. She hummed quietly, unaware of the fullness of the morning. Irene stood by the base of the pear tree, watering can in hand. The blossoms shimmered delicate and white, tinged with soft green at the tips. She reached out and touched one gently. I thought it had died after Robert left, she said aloud, not to anyone in particular. She looked over her shoulder. Emily raised her head. Why didn't it bloom, Grandma? The child asked. Irene returned to the chair and poured herself tea. Sometimes trees grieve too, she said softly. They wait. Emily didn't speak right away. She watched a petal drift slowly to the ground, then leaned her head on Irene's knee. Are you angry with my mother? She asked, almost in a whisper. Irene stirred her tea, watching the steam spiral up into the warm air. No, she said. But I will not forget. From beneath the chair, she pulled out the wooden box, the same one Lauren had once called worthless. Inside, she placed Robert's old photograph, now clean and framed. Next to it, a fresh printed copy of the bank book, her name restored, her access reinstated. No need for declarations, no need for noise, just paper and memory. A quiet chime sounded from the phone in her apron pocket. One message, Julie, your application has been accepted. You are free to re-sign everything. Irene didn't reply. She looked up at the sky instead, eyes squinting at the light, and simply poured more tea. The cup clinked gently against the saucer. A pear leaf fluttered down, landing softly on the table between them. A single drop of water clung to it, round and clear. Emily picked it up with both hands and smiled. Without asking, she opened her drawing book and pressed the leaf onto a clean page. She flattened it carefully as if preserving something sacred. "I'll keep this," she said. Irene said nothing. But in her silence, the tree rustled, and somewhere deep inside, a long-held breath finally exhaled. The house never truly changed, but Irene did. What once felt like quiet erasure became a place where her voice echoed through silence, steady and remembered. Justice may arrive late, but it carves its place like roots under a pear tree patient, unseen and enduring. Sometimes it only takes one quiet woman to stop generations of control. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.